My husband once loved someone so deeply that even after that person died, he kept the mating mark on his neck for years. I found out on our wedding night. But then he started caring for me, started trusting me, started loving me. I thought I had won against the past until that night. A phone call came in. The housekeeper said someone was standing outside the Jiang estate gates, and that person claimed to be Lu Yao, someone who had been dead for years. The debt notice sat in the middle of the table. I looked at it, then looked at my father. He didn't raise his head. The Gu family has no way out, Han. His voice was dry, as if he had said these words 100 times inside his own head. I didn't ask anything back. I had heard enough whispers behind closed doors for months. The company running at a loss, bank debts, collectors showing up at our door. The Jiang family has agreed to help. In return, they need an omega for their son. I tightened my hands inside my sleeves, not out of fear, but because I already knew from the way my father avoided my eyes that this wasn't an offer. This was a decision that had already been signed. Jiang Bai, the Jiang family's young heir, you know who he is? I knew who in these circles didn't. A cold alpha, a name that always topped every ranking of the financial elite and entirely expressionless in every article ever written about him. I said nothing. I only looked at the debt notice one last time, then nodded, not because I agreed, but because I no longer had the right not to. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room staring out at the dark window frame, thinking about everything I stood to lose. I could run. I could refuse, leave home, let my father face the consequences he had made. But then I thought of my mother, of my younger sibling still in school. Of the house that, if the Gu family fell, would leave everyone without a roof. I didn't protest out loud. I only sat there, letting the bitterness sink down on its own, quiet inside my chest, hidden from everyone. The next morning, I came downstairs wearing the calmest face I could manage. My father looked at me, slightly surprised that I hadn't cried, hadn't pleaded. He didn't know. I had cried myself out the night before alone without making a single sound. You agree? I nodded, not because I wanted to, but because silence was the only thing I had left, so no one could see me break. The wedding took place in a banquet hall far too grand for a marriage far too cold. I wore a ceremonial outfit chosen in advance, not because it suited me, but because it suited the image both families wanted to present. People took photos. People shook hands. People smiled, but none of them smiled for me. I stood beside Jiang Bai throughout the ceremony. He was taller than I expected, colder than I expected. He didn't look at me more than 3 times. When the officiant asked the final ritual question, I heard my own voice answer, "I do," and felt as though someone else was speaking. No kiss that lasted, no hand that held me warmly, only applause at the right moment, in the right rhythm, as if everything in this ceremony had been scripted in advance, and I was nothing more than a minor role in my own wedding. That evening, as the car brought me to the Jiang estate, I watched the city lights slide past the window and thought, from now on, this is my home, a home I was never once asked if I wanted to enter. On the wedding night, the room was so vast that the sound of my own footsteps echoed off the walls. Jiang Bai sat at the edge of the bed, removing his outer jacket, not saying a word. I didn't know what to say either. The bedside lamp cast its light across his neck, and I saw it, a mating mark. Old, faded, but still there, like a reminder that would never fully disappear. I went still, an alpha who already carried a mating mark, and yet he had married me. My hands instinctively clenched in the folds of my clothes. Jiang Bai noticed me looking. He pulled his collar up to cover it, quick and deliberate, a reflex worn smooth from years of repetition. Jiang Bai, I didn't finish the sentence. His eyes met mine. No anger, no unease, just empty, an emptiness I had never seen in someone still living. I fell silent. I didn't ask anything more. But inside my head, the question kept looping, refusing to quiet. Whose mark was that? And why would someone who already carried a mating mark be standing in front of me on their own wedding night? I hadn't meant to ask, but the silence in the room was too heavy, and I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen anything. That mark. Jiang Bai stood up, turned his back to me, began loosening his tie as if my words had never been spoken. That person is dead. His voice was flat, not a tremor in it. But his hand, I saw it, paused for exactly 1 second on his shirt button before continuing as if nothing had happened. I didn't ask for the name. I didn't ask what had happened. Because I already knew, just from the way he said those 4 words, that this wasn't an answer. This was a door he had just slammed shut in front of me with a sign nailed over it. Do not ask further. I lay down on the far side of the bed, my back to him, the way he had turned his back to me, 2 strangers, lying apart. A stretch of empty mattress between us in the room they called the wedding suite. I closed my eyes but couldn't sleep. I only thought, that person who died, did they truly die? Or did they only die in his words while living on forever in his heart? A few days later, I struck up a conversation with the oldest servant in the house, a woman named Auntie C, the only one who looked at me without guardedness in her eyes. I asked carefully, indirectly, did the young master ever have anyone, particularly close to him? Auntie C paused her dusting, glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. You're asking about young Master Lu Yao. The name fell lightly like a leaf dropping, but I could hear the weight behind it. Lu Yao, the young master's closest friend from childhood. They grew up together from the time they were in nursery school. She lowered her voice further, closer than close. You understand what I mean? I understood. I had understood already, from the faded mating mark on Jiang Bai's neck, from the room at the end of the hall I had never been allowed near, from the way everyone in this house avoided a certain name the way you avoid pressing a wound that hasn't healed. Where is that person now? Auntie C was quiet for a long moment, long enough for me to know the answer wouldn't be gentle. Gone, young master, a few years ago. Gone how? I asked, even though I probably shouldn't have pressed. Auntie C looked toward the door, dropping her voice like she was telling a forbidden story. A car accident. Right before the announcement that young Master Jiang Bai would officially become the Jiang family heir, I went still. Right before the announcement of succession, not just any ordinary day of the year, but the single most pivotal milestone in Jiang Bai's career. After that, the young master was like a man without a soul for months, Auntie C continued, her voice going low. The announcement ceremony still had to go on, the family couldn't wait. But after that, the young master was never the same person. I held my expression steady, but inside, a question kept spiraling, refusing to settle. A coincidence of timing like that, could it truly have been a coincidence? Please don't tell the young master I told you this, Auntie C said quickly, her anxiety plain. It is a forbidden topic in this house. I nodded. I promised to keep it quiet, but I knew I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it. One afternoon, while Jiang Bai was at the office, I took advantage of the quiet house and walked down the far corridor. The one Auntie C had once let slip housed a room no one was allowed to enter. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into a world that had stopped at some point in the past. The bed was still made with clean sheets. Books still stood neatly on the shelf, as though the owner had only stepped away to brew a cup of tea. A jacket still hung on the hook, its shape intact as though someone had worn it just the day before, not a speck of dust. Someone still cleaned this place regularly, carefully, tending to it like a shrine. On the study desk, a small framed photo, 2 teenage boys laughing. One was a younger Jiang Bai. The other had delicate features and a smile so bright it made me feel cold looking at it. I didn't need to ask who that was. I stood in the middle of the room and for the first time understood something clearly. I had not married a man. I had married someone who was living inside a grave that would never be filled. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that had already shaped itself, with no need for anyone to say so. Jiang Bai had breakfast with me at the right time on the right schedule. He asked if I needed anything in a voice as even as reading from a work memo. He was never rude. He was never warm. He came home late every evening, sometimes very late, and always slept in his private study, citing work. I didn't argue. I wasn't in a position to argue. There were evenings when I tried to start a conversation, asking about his day, and he answered exactly what was asked. Not one word more, not one word less, like speaking to a reporter, not to his own spouse. I learned not to expect more than that. I reminded myself, this is a transaction. I came here to save the Gu family, not to be loved, But there were nights, lying alone in a room far too large for one person, when I still couldn't stop myself from wondering, would there ever come a day when that courteous gaze would look at me with something other than duty? One morning, I came across a report Jiang Bai had left on the dining table, open to a page of quarterly market analysis. I hadn't meant to read it, but a line of figures caught my eye, a revenue projection for a new product line, built on an assumption I thought was wrong. I had studied finance. I had once managed the Gu family's books myself before everything fell apart. That evening, when Jiang Bai returned, I quietly placed a small note beside the report, marking the section I questioned, adding a brief question, not asserting anything, not correcting him. I wasn't sure he would rate it. I wasn't sure he wouldn't be annoyed by someone outside the company inserting themselves into his work. The next morning, the note was gone from the table. He said nothing about it. But that evening, for the first time, he came home earlier than usual. And at dinner, he asked me something that wasn't in his usual script. Where did you study finance? It was the first question he had ever asked me that wasn't out of obligation. At a local school, I answered, not sure whether the reply would disappoint him. Nothing prestigious, but I once handled the Gu family's accounts myself before everything collapsed. Jiang Bai looked at me for longer than usual. What you flagged in that report, not many people in my finance division would have caught it. I was only guessing. A correct guess is still correct. He didn't smile, but something in his voice had shifted, slightly softer than the way he'd spoken to me throughout those past weeks. I looked down at my bowl of rice, not wanting him to see how surprised I was by his own reaction. From that day on, occasionally over dinner, he would ask me a few questions related to work, not many, not deep, but enough for me to notice something. He was looking at me as someone who had something worth saying, not merely a name on a marriage certificate. I didn't know whether to feel glad or careful, but that night, for the first time since I had walked into this house, I fell asleep a little more easily. The crisis arrived without warning. A morning newspaper ran a story claiming the Jiang Corporation used substandard materials in its flagship product line, fake news, but it spread fast enough to send the company's share price plummeting within hours. Jiang Bai called an emergency meeting, his face drawn tight as a wire about to snap. I wasn't invited into the meeting room, but I read everything I could find, then waited for him outside his office door, holding a hastily written note. The article's source traces back to a media company that previously worked with your competitor. This isn't news, it's a calculated attack. He stopped, looked at me, then at the note. That night I sat with him until nearly dawn, helping him trace the path of the false story, drafting a response sharp enough to shut down the rumors before the market opened. When it was finally over, the first light of morning was already slipping through the window. Jiang Bai leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, not courtesy, genuine respect. "You should rest," he said, his voice rough from the sleepless night. "So should you?" He didn't answer. He only stood, walked around the table, and did something that made me go completely still. He picked up the thin blanket from the sofa and draped it over my shoulders, a small gesture. But the first time he had ever touched me for no reason other than wanting to, not for ceremony, not for the sake of an audience. "Thank you," he said very quietly, "for tonight." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, holding the edge of the blanket in my hands as if it were worth far more than it was. He turned away to make coffee, his back still straight, still cool in the way I had grown used to. But the warmth he had left on my shoulders didn't fade immediately. It stayed there, a while after he had already walked out of the room. I found myself wondering, was this the beginning of something, or only a moment of exhaustion that had briefly loosened a man who always kept himself closed? A few weeks later, Jiang Bai came home in a state I had never seen, his clothes disheveled, his steps unsteady, the smell of liquor reaching me from the door. I helped him to the bedroom, trying to keep him from falling. "I'm sorry," he murmured, eyes closed. "I'm sorry I couldn't." I sat down beside the bed, about to ask what had driven him to drink, when he continued, his voice cracking open like something he had held shut far too long. "Lu Yao, I couldn't protect you. My heart missed a beat. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to someone no longer here. An apology long overdue, spoken aloud only because the liquor had made him forget he was supposed to keep it buried. I sat quietly, watching him drift into sleep mid-sentence, my chest a tangle of feelings I couldn't sort through. I had just witnessed a part of him he had never shown anyone. And I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to have seen it. The next morning, Jiang Bai woke later than usual, his face still carrying the weight of the night before. He glanced at me across the breakfast table, a brief flicker of hesitation crossing his features, as though he was trying to piece together what he had said, what he had done. I poured his tea the way I did every morning. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "I did," I said, and left it at that. I didn't mention the name he had called out in his drunken state. I didn't mention the apology that wasn't meant for me. I only slid the plate of pastries toward him as if the night before had never happened. He looked at me for a moment, then bowed his head to eat. His shoulders visibly eased. I thought, there are kinds of pain that don't need to be named to be respected. And perhaps the silence I chose this morning was the first real thing I ever gave him, not out of duty, but because I wanted to. After that night, something in the way Jiang Bai treated me quietly changed. He came home a little earlier than before, not much, but noticeably, he asked what I wanted for dinner instead of leaving it to the staff to decide. Some evenings he would bring home a finance book and set it on my desk, saying, "I thought you'd like this," then walk away without another word. I didn't ask why, but I knew he felt guilty. He knew I had heard what I shouldn't have, and he was finding ways to make up for it without putting it into words. I didn't turn any of it away. I accepted each small thing like accepting a sliver of light through a window that had always stayed shut. Some evenings we sat together in the parlor reading, not saying much, just the sound of turning pages and the ticking clock. I realized I was growing used to his presence, and one part of me, the part I tried not to acknowledge, had started looking forward to evenings like this. One rainy evening, the power flickered out. We sat in the parlor with a single small candle while we waited for it to stabilize. The candlelight cast something softer than usual across Jiang Bai's face. "Lu Yao liked rain," he said suddenly, not looking at me, his eyes fixed on the flame. I stayed quiet and let him speak. Every time it rained, he'd pull me outside and we'd stand under the eaves watching it fall for hours. He said rain slowed everything down, gave people time to think. He kept going, small memories, one at a time. The afternoon they skipped school to go fishing. The time Lu Yao stepped forward to take the blame for him in front of the elders. A long summer they once spent together by the sea. For the first time he wasn't guarded. For the first time he spoke of those years the way you speak of something beautiful, not something painful. I listened without interrupting, without pressing for more. I just wanted him to be allowed to speak, because I realized, perhaps for the first time in years, he was being permitted to remember that person without having to hide it. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long while, only the sound of rain beyond the eaves. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." "I have nothing to be jealous of," I answered honestly. "That was a part of you. I don't need to erase it to make room for myself." He looked at me with something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not surprise, a deep relief. The kind that comes from setting down a weight carried too long. "For years, I never told anyone about this," he said. "I was afraid people would think I hadn't moved on. Afraid they'd feel jealous or pity me." "I don't pity you," I said. "I only see that you once loved someone truly. There's nothing wrong in that." He didn't say anything more. But that night, for the first time, he stayed beside me longer than necessary. For no particular reason, only that he seemed unwilling to stand up and leave this rare, quiet moment. I was unwilling to leave it too. One morning I was coming down the stone staircase, still wet from overnight rain, and slipped. I only had time to cry out once before I caught the railing, a sharp pain flaring through my wrist. Jiang Bai appeared from somewhere, faster than I could have expected, beside me within seconds. Steadying me, his hands were visibly trembling. "Are you hurt? Where does it hurt? Let me call a doctor." His voice came in quick bursts, nothing like the composed stillness he always kept. "I'm fine, just a scrape. Let me see." He didn't wait for permission. He lifted my wrist, examining it carefully. his fingers touching my skin so gently it seemed like he was afraid of adding to the pain. When he was sure it was only a surface scrape, he let out a long, slow breath, as though he had just lived through something far larger than a minor slip on the stairs. "Be more careful," he said, and there was still a slight tremor in his voice. "I can't," he didn't finish the sentence. But it was clear, even to himself, that he was surprised by his own reaction. He led me inside, found the gauze himself, sat down in front of me, and bandaged the scrape on my wrist with a patience I wouldn't have expected from someone as busy as he was. "Where did you learn to do this?" I asked, reaching for something to say to ease the strange feeling in my chest. "When I was young, I used to get hurt playing with." He stopped mid-sentence, then continued without the name. "I got hurt a lot when I was little." I didn't ask more. I only watched him, these hands that were always cold in boardrooms, now working slowly and carefully over every centimeter of my wrist. A strange feeling rose in me, not quite hope, but close to it. I reminded myself, this could simply be an alpha's natural protective instinct. It didn't have to mean anything more. I didn't want to let myself believe in something uncertain, only to have to undo it later. But that night, when he asked if I was still in pain before going to sleep, I couldn't stop my chest from warming just a little, even after I had told myself not to let it. One evening, I went looking for him to ask about the schedule for a family gathering, and found him standing in front of the door to the memorial room, the door barely open, not going in. He stood there a long time, his back to me, not knowing I was watching. I didn't call out. I only stayed at a distance, quietly observing. Eventually, he raised his hand, almost placed it on the doorknob, then let it fall, as if he wasn't sure what he actually wanted to do. "I'm not going in anymore," he said without turning, as though he had always known I was standing behind him. "It's been a long time since I went in." "Why are you standing here tonight then?" He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, maybe because lately I've noticed I think of him less. He turned and looked at me, a faint confusion in his eyes, like a man who had just realized he was standing somewhere else on the map of his own feelings, without remembering the road he'd taken to get there. "Is that a bad thing, Gu Han?" I didn't answer right away. I only stepped forward, stood beside him, and let the question hang in the air between us. Because some questions only the person asking them can answer. That night, no one initiated anything. It simply arrived, the way water eventually finds the path it's been searching for. He touched me more gently than I had thought someone as closed off as he was capable of being. I let myself go, let the feeling lead without asking anything more. But at the moment we were closest, he stopped. His hands trembled, not because of me. Something else was pulling at him from the inside. "I'm sorry," he breathed, his forehead resting against mine. "I can't," he didn't finish, but I understood. A part of him still felt like he was betraying someone who was no longer here. I didn't push him. I just held him, letting him lean against me in silence, my own chest aching but not angry because I knew that guilt wasn't for me. It was for an old wound that had never been allowed to heal. The next morning, neither of us mentioned the night before. Jiang Bai had breakfast at the usual hour, asked the usual questions, but I could see in his eyes a guilt he wasn't able to fully conceal. I didn't blame him. Loving someone who still carries part of their soul for someone else isn't anyone's fault. It's only a wound that needs time, not a failure of feeling. "You don't need to rush," I said when he seemed like he was about to try to explain. "I'll wait until you're truly ready." He looked at me, surprised by that patience, as though he had never imagined someone would choose to stay without demanding a promise immediately. "How can you be so patient?" "Because I don't want something that's been forced before it's real," I said. "I want it to come when you're ready of your own will, not out of guilt, not out of obligation." He said nothing more, but from that day, I noticed him looking at me differently, as though he was genuinely weighing something for the first time without anything holding him back. A few evenings later, in the quiet of the reading room, Jiang Bai came to find me, his face carrying a resolve I hadn't seen in him before. "I've thought it through," he said, standing before me, no preamble. "I don't want to let the past decide how I live with the present." I set down my book, looked at him, and waited. Lu Yao will always be a part of me. I can't erase that, and I don't think I should, But you, he stepped closer, lifted my chin, his eyes without a trace of the hesitation that had been there before. You are who I choose. For now and for whatever comes after, not out of obligation, because I want to. He kissed me, and this time he didn't stop partway through. Not one shred of guilt pulling him back. I held onto him, letting this moment fill every lonely night I had spent inside this house. I thought, finally, something real has begun. I didn't know, it was also the last moment before everything fell apart. The phone rang in the middle of the night. I came awake to find Jiang Bai already sitting up, listening, his face going steadily pale with every passing second. "What?" he asked again, and his voice, a voice I had never heard sound that way, was shaking, completely uncontrolled. He hung up, sat motionless for a moment, his hand gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white. "Jiang Bai." "Someone," he said, each word halting as though he didn't believe what he was about to say. "Someone just appeared at the main gates, claiming to be Lu Yao." My heart dropped a beat. "It must be a fraud," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "After all these years, how could I have to go see?" He was already up, pulling on a jacket, no longer hearing anything I said. I followed him outside, not stopping to ask whether I should. I only knew that tonight, a name that was supposed to be dead was about to decide which direction everything would turn. We reached the main gates of the estate, where a man stood under the security lantern, his jacket worn thin, his face thinner than in the photograph I had once seen, but still the same face. Jiang Bai stopped a few steps away, as if his legs had suddenly stopped obeying him. "Lu Yao." His voice broke open, no longer the composed tone I had known. The man nodded, his eyes red. "It's me, Jiang Bai. I'm sorry for letting you believe I was dead." I took one step back, watching Jiang Bai move forward, slowly, unsteadily, the way you approach something in a dream you're afraid will vanish the moment you touch it. He raised his hand, touched the man's face, then his shoulder, making sure this wasn't something his mind had invented. "It's really you," he said, his voice breaking. "It's really you." I stood there in the shadow just beyond the reach of the lantern light, watching my husband find again a part of his life he had believed lost forever. And I understood, in that exact moment, that I had become an outsider in my own story. They held each other in the entryway, no longer caring that anyone was watching. Jiang Bai was crying. I had never seen him cry, not once, throughout the months we had lived together. "I thought you were gone," he said, his voice splintering. "I've been living with that for years, Lu Yao. I know," Lu Yao answered, his hands gripping Jiang Bai's jacket. "I know how much it hurt you. I'm sorry." They talked, pouring out hundreds of things held back for years, each word trying to fill a space that had seemed impossible to fill. I stood there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Neither of them looked at me once. Neither of them remembered I was there too, that I was also a part of this house. A part of this man's life. I didn't blame them. But somewhere inside me, something was quietly breaking apart without a sound in the middle of this reunion beautiful enough to be devastating. I stepped back another pace, then another, out of the light and into the darkness beside the row of trees. From here, I could see everything clearly. The way Jiang Bai held Lu Yao as though letting go would mean losing him again. The way he wiped away the other man's tears with a tenderness I had never once been given, not even once. I thought of the night he said, "You are who I choose." I thought of the kiss with no guilt in it. The promise I had believed was real. Perhaps it had been real once. But standing here watching this, I understood something more clearly than I ever had. I had never been his first choice. I was only the person who came after. The one who had filled a space left by someone who had been there before. And now, that space had found its rightful owner again. I turned away and walked back toward the entrance, not waiting for anyone to call my name, because I knew tonight no one would. When the whole household gathered in the main parlor, Lu Yao told his story in an even voice, as though he had rehearsed it in his head for years. That year, I discovered a plot to purge someone close to the Jiang family. I stumbled onto too much and became a target. I sat at the far end of the room where no one was paying attention, listening to every word. They sent people after me that night. I barely escaped with my life. The person who helped me flee told me to fake my death to make them stop hunting me. Why didn't you contact me?" Jiang Bai asked, his voice still unsteady, even one word. "I was afraid any contact would make you the next target," Lu Yao answered, holding Jiang Bai's gaze. "I chose silence because I didn't want you to die for my sake." The room went still. I watched Jiang Bai accept every word without a flicker of doubt. I didn't know why, but something small and uneasy had just caught light inside me. The story was too seamless, too perfectly timed, to explain a return that had arrived at the exact moment things between Jiang Bai and me had only just begun. That night, after everyone had returned to their rooms, I noticed the light still burning in Jiang Bai's study. I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door gently. He was sitting with his head in both hands, his shoulders shaking in small, quiet waves. Jiang Bai. He looked up, eyes red, no longer hiding it. "All those years," he said, his voice raw with self-blame, "I believed what they told me. I organized a memorial. I stood there and cried, and then I kept living. I never questioned it once, never looked deeper. You had no reason to question it." "I was the only person who should have," he said, almost too loudly, then caught himself, bringing his voice back down. "If I had looked harder, maybe I would have found him years earlier. Maybe he wouldn't have had to spend all that time hiding alone." I had no words to comfort someone whose self-blame had been quietly corroding them for years. I only sat down beside him in silence, so he would know that tonight at least, he didn't have to carry it alone. The next morning, at the family breakfast, Lu Yao arrived with his collar deliberately set low, just enough for everyone to see the old mating mark on his neck, even after all the years, still faintly visible. The whole table went quiet for a few seconds. "It's still here," Lu Yao said, not addressing anyone in particular, but his gaze crossed mine for exactly one beat. "No matter how many years pass, Jiang Bai's mark on me has never fully faded." I tightened my hands under the table and held my face steady. I understood that statement wasn't meant to state a fact. It was a declaration that despite my being here, despite the ring on my finger, the first mating mark, the real mark, still belonged to someone else. Jiang Bai said nothing in response, but he didn't object either. That silence, to me, was more painful than anything he could have said. I looked down at the porridge in front of me and forced a spoonful, even though my throat had been tight since the moment those words were spoken. Over the days that followed, I felt clearly how the family's gaze had shifted. People who had been courteous to me before now kept their distance more plainly. A few of the old matriarch's confidantes openly expressed sympathy for Lu Yao, retelling the story of first love torn apart by adversity. At every available opportunity. "After all," an elderly distant aunt said to me, in a tone as gentle as sincere advice but with a meanness I heard plainly underneath, "the marriage between you and the young master was only ever for the benefit of both families." Lu Yao, now that's true feeling. I didn't respond. I had learned in this environment that pushing back too soon only made you appear weaker. But that evening, behind my closed door, I allowed myself to sink to the floor for a while and let the hurt flow out where no one could see. I had once thought I had found a place to stand in this house. Now I realized that place had been more fragile than I'd known, shakeable by nothing more than the return of a name. I ran into Lu Yao alone for the first time in the back garden when we both happened to step outside to avoid the noise in the house. "You've taken my place," Lu Yao said without preamble, his eyes sharp and cold, completely unlike the fragile demeanor he showed in front of Jiang Bai. "Your marriage to him was an arrangement in the end." "My feelings for him," I answered, keeping my voice level, "were not an arrangement." Lu Yao smiled faintly, a smile without any warmth in it. "You think a few months compares to over 20 years. "I'm not measuring time," I said. "I only know that he chose me, in his own words, before you appeared." The smile on Lu Yao's face dimmed slightly. "Then let's see," he said, turning to go, "who he truly cannot live without." I stood there and watched his figure move away, my chest not frightened, but with something cold running down my spine. This was not someone who had returned only for love. That evening, Jiang Bai came looking for me, his face worn down with the look of someone being pulled in two opposite directions. "I'm sorry," he said, "for saying nothing this morning when Lu Yao, when he mentioned the mating mark. You don't need to apologize for the truth." "But I saw that you were hurting." "I was hurting," I admitted, not wanting to pretend to more strength than I felt. "But I understand, it's a part of your past." He sat down, hands pressed together. "I don't know what to do," he said very quietly. "Part of me wants to make it up to him for everything he went through alone. Another part of me doesn't want to lose what I only just found with you. You don't need to decide tonight. I'm afraid," he said, looking at me, "that no matter what I choose, I'll end up hurting one of you." I had no answer for that. I only took his hand so he would know, for now at least, I was still here. Even if I couldn't say how much longer that would hold. One afternoon, Lu Yao suddenly developed a high fever. An old wound from his years of hiding had flared up again. Jiang Bai rushed to Lu Yao's room the moment he heard, and I followed because I was still a member of this household. When he leaned down to help Lu Yao sit up and take his medicine, I saw Jiang Bai's body give a faint shudder, and it wasn't the ordinary worry of someone concerned for a sick person. The scent from the old mating mark, faded as it was still pulling at the alpha instinct in him, drawing him toward Lu Yao in a way no act of will could stop. His hands held Lu Yao more tightly than they needed to. His breathing was faster than usual. I stood at the door and watched and felt a kind of pain that was unlike anything I had felt before. This wasn't a feeling he could choose to halt through willpower. This was something embedded in his body. A biological trace I had no way of competing against, no matter how hard I tried. I quietly left the room, leaving the two of them to the fever and the instinct pulling them back toward each other. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the room that had once witnessed the night he said, "You are who I choose." Only a few weeks ago, I still believed I had found something real. Now I wasn't sure. The love between him and me, even if genuine, was something built through time and choice. What existed between him and Lu Yao had grown into the blood and the body, and didn't need to be chosen to survive. I asked myself, is a love that must be chosen every day weaker than a love that has become part of who someone is? I had no answer. I only knew that the happiness I had almost reached was now more fragile than it had ever been, like a candle set in front of a wind that might come at any moment. I lay down, looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time since that night, I let myself consider. Should I prepare myself to lose him instead of continuing to hope? Auntie C sought me out early one morning before the rest of the house had woken, her expression drawn with worry. "Young Master Han, I need to tell you something, but you must promise to keep it quiet." I nodded, let her into my room, closed the door. "I have served in this house for many years," she said, lowering her voice. "I remember young Master Lu Yao clearly from before, but there are a few things about the person who has returned that trouble me." "What things?" "The way he holds his chopsticks. He used to use his left hand. Now he uses his right. And certain dishes he always loved, he now seems to have forgotten, dishes he once spoke of all the time." I sat quietly, listening to each detail, feeling something inside me go cold. "I don't dare say anything to the young master," Auntie C continued. "Because the young master is too overwhelmed with relief at having found him again. But I'm afraid if something is wrong, you will be the one who suffers most." I thanked her, promised to be careful, and after she had gone, sat there for a long time as the small doubts began arranging themselves into a shape I didn't want to believe was right. From then on, I paid closer attention to Lu Yao's every movement quietly, so no one would notice. One evening, I saw him slip out of the house alone, without telling anyone, heading toward the residential compound of a distant branch of the Jiang family, a branch that had long been in a quiet power struggle with Jiang Bai's side. I followed at a distance, pressed myself against a low wall near the compound. Through a lit window, I saw Lu Yao seated across from someone I recognized. Jiang Heng, the family member who had once been suspected of involvement in the assassination attempt years ago. They spoke to each other, not the way two strangers newly acquainted would speak, but the way people who had known each other for some time would. I couldn't hear the words, but the careful posture, the way they kept glancing toward the door to check for anyone listening, was enough to tell me this was not a chance meeting. I slipped away before I was noticed, my chest heavy. I didn't know what to do with what I had just seen. To say something would mean risking being believed by no one, or worse, being seen as someone trying to frame Lu Yao out of jealousy. In the days that followed, Jiang Bai was living beside Lu Yao far more than beside me. He personally arranged Lu Yao's medical appointments, chose his caregivers, and spent each evening listening to Lu Yao recount in detail the years he had spent in hiding. I only want to make it up to him. He told me whenever he came home late, he lost so many years living in fear. I didn't protest out loud, but every evening I ate alone. Every time I waited for him to come back and received only a message saying he was tied up, I felt the distance between us widening one day at a time. I thought about what I had seen at Jiang Heng's compound, about the details Auntie C had shared, but I didn't have enough proof, and I was afraid that if I spoke up now, I would only look like a jealous, possessive spouse who couldn't bear to share her husband's attention with someone else's grief. I chose silence. I kept watching. Even though every day of silence was another day, I felt myself standing further from the marriage I had once believed was real. The Jiang Corporation's founding anniversary banquet took place as it did every year, but this year I felt far more eyes measuring me than usual. An elderly, distant elder of the clan, who had always kept his distance from our arranged marriage, approached me, his tone mild but sharp enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Young Mistress Gu, there have been quite a few developments in the household lately. I wonder whether your position is still secure." I smiled, not letting a single flicker of uncertainty show. The marriage between myself and Jiang Bai was conducted according to full family protocol, witnessed by both the Gu and Jiang families. I don't believe a few developments can overturn something formally ratified and recognized. He looked at me, slightly surprised I hadn't deflected. As for the Gu family's interests, I continued, keeping my voice composed but firm, I trust the Jiang family will honor what was agreed to, because the reputation of a great family cannot rest on a single personal relationship. I turned away after that, giving him no opening to respond. I knew I had defended myself tonight, but I also knew that defending a position with words could only hold as long as someone decided to keep respecting the rules. During the same banquet, as Lu Yao's story of his years in hiding was brought up again, the way he had learned to weave it into every conversation, keeping everyone's attention, I noticed a figure at the far end of the room who wasn't participating, but whose eyes hadn't left Lu Yao for a single moment. Jiang Heng. I recalled the name from what Auntie C had told me, a man long suspected of involvement in the assassination attempt years ago, though nothing had ever been proven. His hand gripped his wine cup more tightly than it needed to. Every time Lu Yao mentioned the faction behind the assassination, his eyes would flick briefly toward Lu Yao, then drop again immediately. I moved closer, pretending to fetch a drink, just close enough to hear him murmur to the person beside him, his voice barely breath. This person came back at exactly the right moment. This wasn't a coincidence. The person beside him hushed him and pulled him toward a corner. I stood there, the drink in my hand still untouched, having just witnessed a reaction that didn't belong to an uninvolved man hearing an old story. That was the reaction of someone afraid of being exposed. That morning, I had driven out on my own to meet privately with some old Gu family contacts, hoping to gather more information about Lu Yao without going through the Jiang household. On the way back, approaching the downward slope near the estate, I pressed the brake for a curve and nothing happened. The brake failed. My heart froze for 1 second before instinct took over. I yanked the handbrake, steered hard to avoid plunging into the ravine alongside the road. The car skidded, slammed into the guard barrier, and stopped with a screeching grind of metal. I sat there, both hands still clenched on the steering wheel, heart hammering, taking a few seconds to confirm I was still alive. People nearby came running, called for help, pulled me from the car before there was any risk of fire. I walked away with scrapes and a bruise on my shoulder from the seatbelt, but looking at the crumpled side of the car, I understood how close I had just come to not walking away at all. And the first question my mind formed was not, why did the brake fail? But rather, Who knew I would be taking this road this morning? I was still sitting in the medical room waiting to be examined when the door swung open and Jiang Bai walked in, his face drained of color, breathing hard as though he had run the whole way. "Are you hurt? Where does it hurt? What did the doctor say?" He kept asking without pause, his hand trembling when he touched my shoulder, his eyes scanning every inch of me as though he was checking for injuries I might be hiding. "I'm fine, just some scrapes. They said the brakes failed on a downhill." His voice came close to breaking. You understand how dangerous that was. I had never seen him lose control like this, not even during the night of the company crisis. He sat down beside me and pulled me against him so tightly that I could feel how fast his heart was beating. "I can't lose you," he said very quietly, barely loud enough for himself. "I can't lose someone again." I went still at those words. Perhaps despite all the time he had been spending with Lu Yao, some part of him, deep in his instincts, still regarded me as someone he couldn't afford to be without. I held him back, letting that warmth ease something of the fear I had carried alone in that crumpled car. A few days later, once I was clear-headed enough, I quietly asked an old acquaintance in the mechanics trade to inspect the wreck. The finding was not brake failure due to wear. The brake fluid line had been cut clean and precise, not natural deterioration. I sought out old Fu, the estate's night gatekeeper, and carefully asked whether he had noticed anything unusual the night before the accident. He hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Now that you ask, I do recall something. Late that night, I was making my rounds near the vehicle yard and saw someone crouching near the underside of your car. I thought it was someone from the repair shop doing a scheduled check, so I didn't think twice. Could you see the face clearly?" "Too dark. There was only the courtyard lantern hanging at the corner, nowhere near bright enough for a face. But I remember." He paused, frowning as he dug through the memory. "The person was wearing a silver bracelet on their wrist. When they bent down, the lantern light caught it. It was shining. I noticed it because I thought it was rather beautiful." My heart dropped a beat. I had seen that bracelet before on Lu Yao's wrist at the banquet a few nights earlier, gleaming under the parlor lights. I thanked old Fu, asked him to say nothing to anyone, and walked back to my room alone, a weight settling in my chest. I couldn't be entirely certain. The night had been dark, and there was only one small detail to go on. But it was enough for me to understand. I was no longer facing a faceless threat. I was facing someone who had stood beside me, smiling, while quietly working to remove me from Jiang Bai's life permanently. I told Jiang Bai everything old Fu had said about the silver bracelet gleaming under the lantern. He was quiet for a long time after hearing it, his face rigid between doubt and a fear I couldn't name. It could be a coincidence. He said, though his voice carried none of the certainty his words claimed, "I'm not asserting anything," I answered. "I'm only telling you what I know. The rest is yours to decide." That evening, he went to find Lu Yao in his private room, and I followed, staying in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. "The night before Gu Han's accident," Jiang Bai said, keeping his voice even, but every word landing heavily. "Where were you?" Lu Yao looked up, something shifted briefly in his eyes, then vanished. "Why do you ask?" "Answer me first," Jiang Bai said, not looking away. "Where were you that night?" I stood in the doorway, watching every expression on Lu Yao's face, searching for a crack in the composure he was working to hold. "I was in my room the whole night," Lu Yao said, his voice so steady it was almost flawless. "Are you asking whether I had something to do with Gu Han's accident? Someone saw a person wearing a bracelet like yours near Gu Han's car that night." Lu Yao was quiet for a single second, then smiled faintly, a smile calibrated to carry just the right degree of wounded feeling. "You'd trust a vague account in the dark over trusting me?" "I didn't say I believed it," Jiang Bai replied, but I could hear the ground shifting under his voice. "I think I know who did this," Lu Yao said, lowering his voice, his expression shifting to a carefully constructed concern. "Jiang Heng. He's always resented me. He's afraid that now I'm back I'll expose what happened years ago. He may have staged this to hurt Gu Han, then frame me for it, to drive a wedge in the family." Jiang Bai stood there without adding anything, but I could see clearly that the sharpness in his eyes had softened, replaced by a doubt that wouldn't be settled in a single evening. I looked at Lu Yao and understood he had just reversed the entire board with only a few words, and I had nothing solid enough in my hands to argue back. The night after the confrontation, Jiang Bai came to find me in the reading room, sat down across from me and didn't speak for a while. I set down my book and waited. I don't know who to believe anymore, he said at last, and his voice was so heavy I could almost hear the weight pressing down on each word. I don't know what I'm protecting or whether I'm only lying to myself. Are you talking about Lu Yao or about me? He looked at me directly. About all of it. About you, about him, about this family, about myself? I didn't answer quickly. Since I met you, he continued, you have never lied to me, never acted for your own gain, I know that. Then what more do you need? I need to be sure, he said, and something in his voice fractured. That the person I'm standing behind is worth everything I'll lose by doing it. I looked at him, my chest hurting, but I didn't turn away from the question. I can't promise you won't lose anything, I said honestly, but I can promise that whatever happens, I won't let you stand alone. He bowed his head and rested his forehead against my shoulder without another word. I sat there with one hand placed lightly on his back, feeling his breathing slowly come back to itself, knowing that tonight, if only for tonight, we had found each other again after all the days of distance. The next morning, I passed by the corridor near Lu Yao's room and heard a sharp crash from inside, then silence. I stopped. The evening before, a servant had mentioned that Jiang Bai had declined to stay for a private dinner with Lu Yao, citing work, but I knew he had actually come to find me instead. Lu Yao knew that too. The door opened abruptly and Lu Yao stepped out, almost walking straight into me, then stopping. The two of us looked at each other for a moment without speaking, but this time his eyes were different, no longer the cold, calculated sharpness of before. This was the gaze of someone who had just realized they were losing and had decided not to accept it. You think you've won? Lu Yao said very quietly, only for the two of us. I said nothing. He looked at me for one more second, then walked away, shoulders back, outwardly composed. But I knew from that moment on he was done playing slowly. The truth came from somewhere no one expected. Jiang Bai himself, Jiang Bai's father, in an evening when the patriarch summoned Jiang Bai to his private study, and I happened to overhear through a door that hadn't quite been pulled shut. You need to put an end to this arrangement with Lu Yao staying in the house. Why? Jiang Bai's voice was cold. What reason do you have for not wanting him here? A long silence. Because, Jiang Bai's voice finally rose, each word as heavy as stone. That year, it was I who gave the order. I stood outside, not breathing. It was not Jiang Heng, he continued, his voice carrying no remorse, only the flat delivery of a truth hidden for too many years. I gave the order because Lu Yao knew too much about the private dealings within the family. And because I would not allow an Omega without proper lineage to become an obstacle to your future. From inside, I heard the sound of a chair falling over. Jiang Bai didn't say another word. I stepped back from where I stood and walked toward my own room, hands clenched at my sides, understanding that the truth just uncovered wasn't there to free anyone, only to start a collapse that no one in this house would be able to stop. Jiang Bai went to find Lu Yao the same night, his face as white as paper. I stood outside, watching through the crack of the door, and didn't go in. You knew before, he said, not a question. You knew it was my father who gave the order, not Jiang Heng. Lu Yao didn't deny it. I knew. He said, and for the first time, every layer of performance was gone from his voice. I knew before I came back. Then why did you tell me it was Jiang Heng? Lu Yao looked directly at him. Because if I had told you the truth from the start, you wouldn't have believed me. You would have protected your father because you hadn't suffered enough yet to stop doing that. And now you have, Lu Yao said, stepping closer, his voice lowering into something both real and cold. I didn't come back only for you. I came back because I lost too much and I want to reclaim it, my name, my standing, everything that was taken from me. Including using me to do it. Lu Yao didn't answer that. His silence to me was the answer. The next morning, Lu Yao came to find Jiang Bai again, not to explain, but to issue terms. I was in the adjacent room listening through the thin wall. "Stand with me," Lu Yao said. "Help me bring the truth of that year to light," forced Jiang Bai to confess before the whole family. "I need you behind me because without you, no one in this family will listen to me. And if I refuse, then I'll do it alone," Lu Yao replied, his voice cooling steadily. "And you will lose the support of everyone who now stands with me, people with enough influence to shake your position." "You're threatening me?" "I'm giving you a choice," Lu Yao said, not softening in the slightest. "Keep Gu Han, lose your standing within the family and face Jiang Bai alone, or stand with me and at least you won't be fighting by yourself." I stood in the room with my back against the wall, listening. I understood. This was the moment when Jiang Bai would have to choose something that would wound someone no matter which way he turned. And I wasn't sure I had the courage to wait and see which way he would go. Jiang Bai didn't come to me that night. He disappeared into his study, door shut, and I didn't knock or ask, because I knew there were decisions that couldn't be rushed. The next morning he left early without breakfast, without a word to anyone. A servant told me afterward that he had stood in the garden for a long time, looking into the distance, as though searching for an answer in the empty air before him. I watched him from my window, saw how his shoulders had dropped slightly, no longer held as straight as they always were. I understood what he was fighting with on one side, the first person he had ever loved, someone who had endured years alone because of a plot his own father had ordered, a debt he owed in both feeling and conscience. On the other side, me, someone he had chosen of his own will. Someone he had promised would not be left standing alone. Neither side was wrong. And that was precisely why he couldn't decide, because for someone with a conscience like Jiang Bai's, both choices cost someone else their pain. I went to find Lu Yao one afternoon when I knew Jiang Bai was tied up in a board meeting. He was in his room, and he didn't look surprised to see me. "I only have one question," I said without circling around it. "And I want an honest answer." Lu Yao looked at me, said nothing, but didn't refuse. "Do you truly love Jiang Bai?" The silence stretched, longer than I expected. Not the silence of someone calculating which answer was most advantageous, but the silence of someone who had just been asked the one thing they didn't want to be touched. "Why are you asking this?" Lu Yao said quietly, his voice lower than it usually was. "Because if you do," I said, "your answer will change what I do next." He looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing whether I was worth an honest reply. Then he looked down, and for the first time since returning, the unassailable composure was gone from his face. "I love him," Lu Yao said, his voice dropping lower, the coldness finally gone. "I loved him before I understood what love was." He paused, his fingers unconsciously touching the faint mating mark on his own neck. "But I also hate him," he continued, hiding nothing now. "I hate him because he didn't come looking for me. I know it makes no sense. I faked my own death. I chose to disappear, but some part of me kept waiting. Kept thinking if he truly loved me, he would feel that I was still alive. I sat and listened without interrupting. He didn't come." Lu Yao said, his voice growing smaller. "He believed I was dead and he kept living, and when I came back, he already had you." He looked up, his eyes no longer cold, only a deep exhaustion, the kind that belongs to someone who has carried too much for too long. "I came back because I wanted to reclaim everything I lost. The power, him, justice, revenge, I can't separate any of it from the rest anymore." I looked at Lu Yao, and for the first time I didn't see an enemy in front of me, only someone who had been hurt so badly they had lost the ability to tell where love ended and hatred began. That evening I sat down and wrote a letter, not long, not full of explanation, because I knew that too much explanation was only a way of convincing myself I was making the right choice. I wrote, "If you need me to step back so that everything can resolve more cleanly, I am willing. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you enough that I don't want to become a burden in a fight that wasn't started by me." I didn't send it immediately. I set the letter on the desk and looked at it for a while, wondering whether this was the decision of someone at peace with themselves, or just a way of choosing to leave before I was pushed out. Finally, I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. Then I stood up, walked to his room, left the envelope in front of his door, and came back to my own room, a little lighter in my chest, but far more painful inside it. I couldn't sleep. Near dawn, there was a knock at my door, harder than usual. I opened it to find Jiang Bai standing there, my letter in his hand. His face something I had no words for, not anger, not grief, but the quiet panic of someone who had just realized they were about to lose the most important thing they had. Were you really going to leave? His voice was rough, as though he had read and reread that letter many times, if that's what would be best for. For who? He cut me off, stepping inside, closing the door. For me, you're deciding what's best for me now. I couldn't answer, this entire time. He said, his voice trembling slightly, you never asked anything of me. You endured, you gave way, you were always willing to step back. When are you going to stand your ground and say that you want to keep something for yourself? My eyes stung. I couldn't hold it back. I didn't know if I still had the right to stand here, I said honestly. You do, he said, stepping closer, taking my hand, his voice steadied now, clear and certain. Because I chose for you to be here, not from obligation, not from guilt, not because there was no other choice. He looked at me without a trace of hesitation. I chose you because I wanted to, and I'm not letting you go. The next morning, Jiang Bai called an unannounced family assembly. I wasn't invited, but Auntie C came to find me shortly after, her eyes red with emotion. Young Master Han, the young master just made a declaration before all the family elders. What did he say? Auntie C took my hand. He said his marriage to you is the only valid one, recognized by both the Gu and Jiang families, and that it will not change for any reason. He also said that the old mating mark is the past, a part of his life that cannot be erased, but also cannot be reason enough to deny the present. I stood without speaking. He also said, Auntie C continued, her voice catching, that if the family cannot accept this, he is prepared to face the consequences alone. I stepped out into the corridor and saw Jiang Bai walking toward me from the far end of the hall, his gaze finding me the moment he caught sight of me. He didn't say anything when he stood in front of me. I didn't say anything either. I only took his hand and he held it, firm and warm, like a promise that had no need for any more words. I wasn't in that room, but servants told me what happened afterward. When news of Jiang Bai's declaration reached Lu Yao's room, he sat motionless for a very long time. Then he picked up the small mirror on the desk, looked into it for a while and set it down gently, not shattering it as people might have expected. He called for his personal attendant and asked for a formal set of clothes to be prepared for the evening. The succession ceremony is coming. He said, his voice so composed it sent a chill through the room. I wish to dress properly. That same night, from what I pieced together later, Lu Yao met with Jiang Heng for the last time, not to exchange information, not to feel each other out. This time they shook hands, a partnership sealed in the desperation of someone with nothing left to lose, and the greed of someone who had been waiting far too long for his moment. I didn't know any of this that night. I only noticed, when I glanced toward Lu Yao's room and saw his light burning well past midnight, that something restless and uneasy in me would not settle. The Jiang family succession ceremony took place on a late autumn evening in the estate's grand hall, candles lit from the entrance all the way up to the highest step of the dais. Guests from all the major families had gathered, the atmosphere so formal it was almost stifling. I stood beside Jiang Bai in full ceremonial dress, sensing that the weight of this evening had nothing to do with the speech or the name about to be announced. I scanned the room, searching for Lu Yao. He stood in a far corner, impeccably dressed as he had asked, his expression so calm I couldn't read a single thing behind it. Jiang Heng stood on the opposite side, also wearing a composure too perfect for a man who had recently been openly edged out of the family succession. The two of them did not look at each other, but precisely because they weren't looking at each other, I knew they were coordinating perfectly. I placed a hand gently on Jiang Bai's arm, about to say something, but before I could speak, the ceremonial music began and the evening formally opened. Jiang Wei had only just stepped up to the dais, the succession document in his hands, when everything happened in under a second. A loud crash from the side door, not a gunshot, but the chaos of people surging through, blades in hand, faces covered, the hall erupted. Shouts and screaming. Candles toppled, the light stuttering in a haze of smoke. I saw their target immediately, not Jiang Bai, not anyone else. Jiang Bai. Two figures moved straight toward him, fast and deliberate, not the recklessness of street thugs. These were hired men, trained, given a precise mark. Jiang Bai stepped back, unable to react in time, hemmed in by the panicking crowd, his room to move shrinking dangerously. I looked at him, then at the two figures closing in, the distance narrowing with every step. There was no time left to think. I ran toward him, not because I was brave, not because I wasn't afraid, only because in that second there was no other thought in my head, only one single thing: he cannot be hurt. I shoved Jiang Bai aside at the exact moment the first blade came down. It caught me on the shoulder and drove into the left side of my ribs, deeper than I had time to register. I didn't fall immediately. I stayed on my feet, still trying to hold my balance, knowing only that I had to stay standing until others arrived. Jiang Bai's voice came, calling my name, no longer the voice I had known. This was the voice of someone in real, helpless panic. The guards rushed in and subdued the attackers. The hall's chaos began to be brought under control. But I felt my strength draining, beat by beat, and I let the person I loved lower me down, his hands shaking beneath me, his voice calling my name once more, this time breaking off before it was finished. Afterward, the servants told me what happened, except it wasn't told to me because I was no longer conscious enough to hear anything. Perhaps this is what I imagined in the dark space between waking and not. Or perhaps it is what I wanted to believe was true. That when the second figure swung toward me, a shape lunged out from a corner of the room, not a guard, not anyone among the guests, but Liu Yao. He deflected enough to send the second blow off course, kept it from finding somewhere more fatal. But it was already too late to stop the first. They say Liu Yao stood in the middle of the hall afterward, looking at me lying in Jiang Bai's arms, his face drained entirely white. None of the composure he had always maintained left in it. He didn't speak. Perhaps there was nothing left to say. Perhaps in the moment he saw the blood, he understood for the first time the line between wanting to win and being willing to let someone die for it. That it was a line he had never truly wanted to cross. But the line had already been crossed, whether he wanted it or not. I heard Jiang Bai's voice before I saw his face. He kept calling my name over and over, as though calling it enough times would keep me from going anywhere. I wanted to tell him I could hear him, that I was still here, but my throat wouldn't produce anything clear. I only felt his hand pressing hard against the wound, the warmth of him moving through his palm into mine, and the sound of his voice breaking apart as he called for help. A voice I had never once heard break, the voice of a man who had never let anyone see him come undone. Now shattering in pieces right in front of me. "Look at me," he said, his hand tilting my face toward him. "Look at me, don't close your eyes." I looked at him. I thought, if this is the last thing I see, it isn't so terrible. The candles in the hall flickered behind him, throwing warm light across his face. The same kind of light as that first evening we sat together by candlelight during the power cut, the night he talked about his childhood without any walls up. I thought I had been in love with him since that night without knowing it. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking when he saw my eyes beginning to grow heavy. "Don't do this, Gu Han, you promised me, you said you wouldn't let me stand alone." I tried to smile, I didn't know if it showed. "Jiang Bai," I called, and my voice was nothing more than a breath. "Don't speak, save your strength." "Thank you," I said slowly, one word at a time, because I knew I only had breath enough for one sentence. "Thank you for letting me love and be loved truly, even if only once." Jiang Bai couldn't say anything after that. I felt his grip tighten around my hand, as though holding tightly enough would be enough to keep me here. I wanted to say more, that I had no regrets, that if I could choose again, I would still walk into this house, still be patient, still run toward him that night. But I didn't have breath enough for those things. I only let my eyes close, my hand still in his, with nothing left unsaid inside me. I was no longer there to witness what came after, but people spoke of it, and I want to believe that, in some way, I already knew. Jiang Heng was seized that same night when the estate's guards swept the grounds and found in his room a meticulously written attack plan, along with payment for hired men bearing his personal seal. clear and unmistakable. Lu Yao didn't flee. He sat in the middle of the hall, through the chaos, until the family's men came to take him, offering no resistance, saying nothing in his own defense. His alliance with Jiang Heng was laid entirely bare, the secret meetings, the intelligence exchanged, the hand behind what had happened to my car. The Jiang family stripped away every privilege he had just reclaimed, expelled him from the estate, and not one of those who had stood with him chose to stand there now. They say when he stepped outside the estate gates for the last time, Lu Yao looked back once, toward the room that Jiang Bai had kept untouched for years as a memorial to him. Then he turned away and didn't look back again. That winter, the Jiang estate was quieter than it had ever been. Jiang Bai stood in the back garden, the same place I had once seen him standing alone, looking into the distance. On the morning he had gone without breakfast and without speaking to anyone, unable to choose. Now he stood in the same way, but this time there was nothing left to choose. His hand rose and touched the fading mating mark on his neck, the mark of someone truly gone now, not faking it, no chance of return. He stood for a long time in the cold late autumn wind, alone in the wide courtyard that had once always been filled with the sounds of people. The Jiang family was still there. The corporation kept running. His name still led every ranking of the financial elite, as it had on the day he had never yet heard mine. But in this house, there were 2 rooms he no longer entered, one at the end of the hall, where he had kept every last thing belonging to someone he once thought was gone forever. And another room, the room belonging to someone who had chosen to stay until the very end, without ever being asked. Jiang Bai stood in the wind, his hand still on the fading mark, looking up at the gray winter sky, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know what he was waiting for anymore. All 3 of them, none left whole. The first lost before he could let go of his hatred. The second lost just as he had learned how to stay. The one remaining, standing alone in the middle of everything left behind, carrying both wounds, not knowing which one was heavier. People often believe the greatest love is the first love, but perhaps that isn't true. Perhaps the greatest love is sometimes the person who stays through all the loss, the one who understands the wounds you've never spoken aloud. The one who accepts your past and still makes you want to walk toward what comes next. Gu Han did not win by possession. He never tried to erase anyone's memory. The only thing he ever did was stay long enough for a heart full of regret to learn how to love once more. And perhaps that is the hardest thing of all. Thank you for listening to today's story. And you, if you had to choose, would you choose the person you loved most, or the person who always chose to stay beside you?